Uganda Parliament. Uganda Parliament is a place where the so-called wise men gathered to formulate a policy. Those so-called wise men are the member of parliament elected from different constituencies, representatives of women, representative of the army, representative of disabled. That house is a place where laws are passed to govern a state. Some of those laws, like the Public Management Act, is passed in Parliament by the people we elected to represent our interests. As a result of laws that are being passed in Parliament, in some other countries, we have the law that gives the police the power to tear gas their own people. In some other state, the police has the power to kidnap, torture, kill, and murder people in blood. You see, the parliament differs from state to state, from dictatorship to democracy. In some other parliaments, we have laws that are passed, like the term limit. The people who are sitting in parliament were elected by the people. They do go very easily on passing laws, like the term limit. If you remove the term limit, you give the president of that country a free blanket to rule as long as he wants to rule. And that is not really why the parliament was established. The parliament was established so that you can put down a fair rules and regulations, a fair law that can govern your state. But so far, we have not reached anywhere close. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss your daily source of information on Uganda. Let me be clear, and let's get started. In 1959, a constitutional committee on self-government for Uganda was put in place by the British colonial government under the leadership of Governor Sir Frederick Crawford. The chairman of the committee was John 𝗏𝗿𝗀 and was known as the 𝗏𝗏 Committee. The committee was composed of 11 Africans, 3 Europeans, and 2 Asians. The number of the committee under the chairmanship of John 𝗏𝗏 was 𝗏𝗏 Bahrain, T.B. Bazarabuza, K. Ingram, Jaffa, C.B. Katiti, Erisha Keronde, B.K. Kiria, J.B.K. Magezi, B.J. Mukasa, W.W.K. Nadiope, Apollo Milton Obote, Kuthad Joseph of Wangoo, G. Oda, C.K. Patel, the secretary of the Constitutional Committee was Frank K. Kalimuzo. The team was set up to consider and make recommendations to the government about the future of direct election, on the role of representative members of the Legislative Council to be introduced in 1961 before independence. The number of representative seats to be filed under the new system. They were given the responsibility to look at those things carefully, to look at the seats to be filled, and at the same time to allocate among different areas of the protectorate, and to find out a method that can ensure that there is adequate representation on the Legislative Council for non-Africans. The recommendation from John 𝗏𝗏 Committee recommended that direct election should be held in all parts of Uganda, and no option should be offered to all indirect election. Members of the Legico should be elected on a common roll. Prior to this happening, the colonial government and the colonial governor used to nominate members leading up to Uganda independence. The process of voters' registration started in 1960, when Uganda had constituencies demarcated for the first time. The first time In 1960, they demarcated the constituencies where election was going to take place. 3% of eligible voters in Buganda participated in the process. The Lokiko had warned all Buganda not to take part in the registration process. The Uganda Parliament was established in 1962, soon after independence. When we got independent, soon thereafter, the Uganda Parliament was established. The body was then known as the National Assembly. It had 92 members and was presided over by a speaker. And that speaker was Sir John 𝙁𝙗𝙗, a British lawyer who was the former Uganda Chief Justice during the Second Parliament in 1963 to 1971. The Prime Minister, Dr. 𝗨𝗴𝗱𝗀, declared himself the President of Uganda. This Parliament witnessed the abolition of Uganda traditional kingdoms and declaration of Uganda as a republic. The Speaker, during the second government, the Second Parliament, the Speaker during the Second Parliament was Narendra M. Patel, a Ugandan of Indian descent. As I said before, those Asians who were brought by their colonial masters, brought to Uganda by their colonial masters, put their leg firm on Uganda soil. They were tools of the colonial masters during colonial period. They wanted to extend their colonial power even after independence. And the Speaker, Narendra, was an Asian. We all know that they're tools of the colonial masters during the colonial period. We Ugandans are very poor in looking back into our history. We all know that when Idi Amin overthrew the government of Dr. 𝗨𝗻𝗱𝗀 in January 1971, those Asians were kicked out of Uganda. The Third Parliament, 1979 to 80, following the overthrow of Idi Amin in April 1979, a new legislative body known as Uganda Legislative Council was established with initial members of 30. It was later, the membership was later increased to 120. The Third Parliament was chaired by Professor 𝗏𝙗𝙗. The legislative body did function until the general election of 1980. People like Professor 𝗏𝙗𝙗 knows exactly what the parliament is all about, what that house for the so-called wise man can do to make your life more difficult. We are always very proud of the people we elect, the people we send to parliament. But each and every parliament in different countries functions on a different level. You have a parliament that can pass laws that ends up in tear gassing their own people. You have the parliament that can approve a law to govern a state that allow the police to tear gas their people. Allow the politics to release or to open up a term limit so that the president can rule for life. So when you look at your own parliament at home, you are being tear gassed, you don't have to complain. We elected those people. We send them to parliament. And now the law they're making there that should govern a state is now governing a state. We are being tear gassed. People are being kidnapped. People are being killed. It is the law we ourselves elected our representative to go and represent us in the parliament that is killing us. In 1980 to 1985, the Fourth Parliament and the Uganda People's Congress, the Speaker at that moment was then Francis Butagira, a Harvard-trained lawyer. The Fifth Parliament, 1986 to 1996, and the National Resistance Movement. The Speaker was Yoweri Museveni, also served as the President of Uganda. The Sixth Parliament, 1996 to 2001, in a one-party system. James Wapanda Tubi served as a speaker until Francis Ayume, a member of parliament from Koboko district, took over as speaker The Seventh Parliament, the Speaker at that moment was 𝗏𝙁𝙗𝙃 𝙁𝙗𝙗𝙗. The most controversial legislative was passed during this period. That is, when they decided to amend the Constitution in order to remove presidential term limits, followed by the 8th Parliament, 2006 to 2011. 𝗏𝙁𝙗𝙃 𝙁𝙗𝙗 continued as a speaker, and 𝗏𝙗𝙗 Rebecca as a deputy speaker. 2011 to 2016. In the 9th Parliament, Rebecca 𝗏𝙗𝙗 then became the speaker, and Jacob Oulanyah as deputy speaker. 2016 to 2021, both speaker and deputy speaker kept their position, bringing us to the 11th Parliament, 2021. Until today, Jacob Oulanyah became the Speaker of Parliament. And when we talk about Parliament, we talk about a place where the so-called wise men gather to formulate laws that govern our countries. So when you see people are being tear gassed, when you see people being kidnapped, when you see people being beaten up, it is our Parliament who cleared the way for those tear gas, kidnapping, and beating. There's hope. You have learned something from what it means, the Parliament of Uganda. And remember, I will be back.